family. I'm so glad all of you are here. Good morning. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I'm very tired. So before I actually start my sermon, but I just wanted to let you guys know that at 1:30 this morning, Nicole can attest to this. This is my friend Nicole. She's in from Arizona. Everybody say hi, Nicole. Thanks, guys. And so at 1:30 this morning, I woke up wide awake, and I'm very angry at David McDowell for this, with the song that we played for him, like, all I ever hear you do is blah, 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 on repeat at 1:30 a.m. My brain would not stop. So I woke up, and I went out to the living room, and I worked on my sermon. So where it was on Friday is not where it is this morning. So we're just going to take a journey together, and it's going to be great. So this week, we're going to start a 2-week series that I decided to call Journeys. And Liz didn't argue with me, so it works. By the way, that is how you spell journeys. You do not make it an I-E-S, and I think it's because the E is before the Y. I was very confused. I had to double check it a few times. And in this series, so I'm going to talk this week, Liz is going to talk next week. We're going to talk about the various journeys we have taken and ones we are going to take. And since I'm the last week of the year, I have the privilege of looking back. And as I was kind of like thinking of the journeys I've been on, we've been on, I actually couldn't help but think, and I knew that Nicole would be in town for this, I couldn't help but think about all the interesting situations Nicole and I have gotten ourselves into. And I wanted to share them with you. And first, we came up with 10 little tips and tricks to help you travel. And it's as a consequence of the various things that we've gotten ourselves into. So here they are. Here are Nicole and Rhiannon's 10 tips and tricks to surviving traveling with your best friend. So number 1, you need to have a night driver and a day driver. I'm the day driver. Nicole is the night driver because she doesn't fall asleep at the wheel. So no, you do not need 2 night drivers or 2 day drivers. You need to make sure you have one of each. It's very helpful on 20-hour drives. Second of all, you need to plan your route, and once you've planned it, print the directions and have a map, because you don't always have reception. Number 3, know the area you're going to. It may be its peak season, or it may be its off season, and that's very helpful to know sometimes. Number 4, make sure that you actually buy the correct tickets for the correct city for the right show, game, or concert. Otherwise, you might end up in Detroit. Number 5, eat healthily when possible, and don't go to dive bars in small seaside towns after 10 p.m. The flounder is never worth it. Ask Nicole and I about that one. Number 6, go to places both will enjoy, especially restaurants, because everyone loves food. Number 7, if you must share a bed, bring a spare blanket. You will stay much warmer that way. Number 8, have a good playlist, especially for the 20-hour drives. And number 9, don't make fun of your friend if they're talking to the deer. It keeps everyone safe. If you notice, I said 10. They're not 10. Because sometime between 1:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. when I was working on this, I have deleted one and I cannot recall it. So there you go. So it was 10, now it's 9. And I really want to share how we kind of came up with these. And I think because you guys will enjoy it, and also I think it really speaks to the journeys we can kind of get ourselves on. So we came up with these because we've taken one too many impulsive trips together. Like the time after Easter service, we decided to go on a short drive in the country and ended up an hour away, and Nicole nearly ran out of gas in her car. And we somehow very miraculously ended up finding Dee's Mini Mart. So this is a picture from that day. The blue is where we wanted to be. The red is where we are. I would like to point out we are an hour away southeast of where we were supposed to be. We had meant to go on maybe a 20-minute drive north. I don't know how we got southeast, but we did. So that's why we make sure that you always have directions and a map, because we didn't have reception. This was when we randomly found Dee's Mini Mart, got gas, and then I was like, oh, hey, we have reception now. So, yeah. Or the time, like, as we've kind of already hinted at, the time that I bought tickets for the wrong town when we were supposed to go see Sia. And instead of buying them for Chicago, which was a 9-hour trip away, I bought them for Auburn Hills, which is a suburb of Detroit. And if you notice, there's Kansas City on the far left. Lawrence is an hour away from that. So Kansas City to Auburn Hills is 13 hours. So if Lawrence is an hour away, that's a 14-hour trip that we decided to do in 48 hours. we're not dead. It's fine. So just, make sure that you have the right tickets for the right town. Nicole is shaking her head at me because these are more often than not my fault. So it's fine. Everything's fine. But the thing about this trip that was really important to pay attention to is that we did this in mid-October, which isn't the best thing to do. It was a little cold, it was a little rainy, but it was fine. But we decided to do this impulsively after we had already bought tickets to Philadelphia for the very next week to do all of New England in 3 days. And so if you don't know what New England is, that is thing like Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts. Yeah, that's Connecticut, Rhode Island. There's one I was forgetting. New Hampshire, yes. So we're like, we should totally practice these super long trips before we get to New England. So Darren, here's your shout out. This is why my car sucks, because we did that trip in my car. Darren has had to fix my car one too many times. And so we are kind of impulsive, and the trip to New England kind of went like this. We landed in Philadelphia at 12:01 a.m. on Friday morning, picked up the rental car. I drove us to the New York border, which is about 2 hours away. Nicole then, after working a full day with small children, drove us from the New York-New Jersey border all the way to Vermont. That's a 5-hour drive at midnight, so I suck. I fell asleep in the back of our Jeep Patriot, and while Nicole shouted loudly at the deer to please not try to dart in front of our car, yelled at the oh-so-lovely truck drivers in New Jersey at 2 a.m. to please leave her alone, and she was singing very loudly and slightly off-key, as she was just trying to stay awake on this really long trip. And the last hour or so, she literally pulled over just after sunrise, and she's like, I'm tired, I'm done with this, it's your turn to drive. And I drove us the last hour into Burlington. And so after Burlington, we decided to drive to Onwit, Maine, which is a 4-hour drive that I turned into a 6-hour drive because I was like, but the mountains are so pretty. And I drove us 6 hours through the mountains. By the end of it, Nicole was just hungry and tired, and she hated the lobster rolls we got, but it was fine. Don't get the lobster rolls, guy. Lobster rolls are not worth it in Maine. I know it's a thing. It's really not worth it. And the next morning, we decided to take a quick tour of the town because here's that rule coming back at you. It was the off season for Maine, so everything was closed. So we just basically walked around and we're like, well, this sucks because we're hungry. But that's okay, we'll head to Salem, Massachusetts. When you hear Salem, Massachusetts, what do you think of?
Witch trials.
Witch trials. And if you go to Salem Witch Trials, like to the place of the Salem Witch Trials in, I don't know, October, does that sound like a great idea? No. So I want you guys to picture with me Victorian Square, but smaller, with less parking, but the same amount of people as you would have for the rib cook-off, and hot August nights combined. Try getting through that. So basically we got trapped inside that town until 4 o'clock. And then we ended up in New York City at midnight. I parked the car exactly at midnight. We walked around at 2 a.m. So basically you're like, Rhiannon, this is a really long story. Here's my point of the story. We were tired. Here is proof of how tired we were. Look at the bags underneath our eyes. That is not a black eye I have. We are exhausted. The middle one is us in New York City at around 1:30 a.m. Nicole is so done with me. Her eyes are basically closed shut. She's so done. And I'm like, I'm so tired and hyper. I'm just going to smile really big. When I get really happy, guys, that means I'm really tired. It's just word of advice. And what I love about all these stories is that we have really nobody to blame but ourselves. We chose to do this. More often I chose to do it. Nicole came along with me because she's a good friend and doesn't like me hurting myself as I take really long drives. But to be fair, she's the one who said it was a great idea to drive from Pratt, Kansas to Salt Lake City, which was a 20-hour drive that we did in one night. But that's okay. We got back safely and everything's fine. What I love about journeys and looking back at kind of the stupidity of us, we were younger, we weren't young, but we were younger, is that it reminds me a lot of the Israelites. And you did not expect me to go there. I know. I promise I'd bring it around. What I love about the Israelites is that they were wandering in the desert for 40 years. And it was kind of their own fault. They got themselves into a jam, and God was like, well, these are the consequences. Kind of like when I nearly crashed us in Wyoming, and it was like, these are the consequences of making me drive really long hours at night. Like, I fall asleep at the wheel. We're not dead. Remember that. Mom, I'm not dead. We're not dead. Just remember that. And so I want us to look at Joshua 4 today. So in Joshua 4, I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to kind of give us context. So it says, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan River, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the tribe of Israel, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes in the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When you crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial together forever for the people of Israel. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of Israel, of the Israelites, and as the Lord had told Joshua, they had carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests had carried the ark of the covenant, and there they are to this day. I don't know if they're there to this day, but they were there until that moment. So this is a pretty straightforward story, right? The Israelites, came up to the Jordan. They were like, we can't cross the Jordan. And God's like, I've parted the Red Sea. The Jordan's not going to be that big of a deal. He parts the Jordan. They cross. Joshua's like, I don't want to forget this. And he's like, let's build some memorial stones. So they build a memorial stone, and now the Israelites can remember it forever. But what I love about Joshua is that he wanted them to remember. And because the Israelites at this point, right, so putting it into context, they were done with the traveling. After 40 years wandering out of the desert, they had gone through all the hoops, made all the right sacrifices, finally had the right people and the right hearts to really start this thing. And they were finally entering into the promised land, the place that God had been promising to them for years. And because Joshua doesn't want the Israelites to forget, he builds a pillar of stones. See, what happened before is that the Israelites had ended up in this mess is because they had kept forgetting. They would do something, God would save them, and then they go, great, and then forget everything that God had done for them. But that's what I love about God, is that God was like, you forgot again. Oh well, guess I'm not abandoning you. And they would stray so far away, even going as far as to build an idol to another God. And to anyone else's mind, it would be like, there's no hope of redeeming this. God was still with them. Even after the golden calf, he sent manna and quail. He gave them a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night to guide them. And so let me phrase this maybe a little different way. Even in the midst of their punishment, God still chose to protect and guide the Israelites. So as you look back on 2019, where are the spaces that you've strayed off the path? Where have you decided that your way looked better than God's? Maybe it's in the common ways that we always kind of harp on, of excessive eating, drinking, drug use, sex. But how about busyness? Buying into the lie that if you stay busy enough, that you can outrun the problems you don't really want to face. Guilty as charged over here. And there's so many ways that we can stray that aren't just sinning. Straying from God's path means that when we choose to believe that somehow our lives being separated from God's guiding is better. And can I assure you that it isn't? It might feel better, but it isn't better. And what I love about God is it doesn't matter how far off you are, how messed up you get, God is still seeking a relationship with you. He isn't sending like manna and quail our way. Does anybody get my joke from the other night? Manna is the bread that God sent. Like, that's the joke, right? Thank you. God may not be doing that anymore. He's not sending down bread from heaven. He's not sending us quail anymore. But God does send us community and love. That's kind of the point of this church thing. And what I love about our community is like the things in the back of the seats for Christmas Eve just kind of popped into my head of us reminding you that you do not need to be perfect to have the love of God. God's love comes because he loves the hot mess express that is humanity, and he wants to do things with them. So in spite of your perfections, God sends help, not because of them. So the Israelites, right, were finally in the right place spiritually. That's what we're talking about, right? Like, kind of where are we spiritually? And they finally had the right timing to receive the blessing that God had for them. And timing in God's kingdom is critical. And it doesn't mean we should get paralyzed and like freeze up about like, oh no, I have to find the right timing of something. But rather that God gets the timing right. I called this message, Always Take the Scenic Route, based off of a $9.99 piece of art. Actually, Nicole, can you hand it to me? It's underneath the seat. Good old Francesca's $9.99 piece of art. And it says, Always Take the Scenic Route. I bought this right when Nicole and I started, when we moved in together, because it felt really true. We both work from Kansas, and that's what kind of helped us bond in Kansas, is that Kansas was really hard for us, and we just didn't really fit in, and we didn't know what to do. And so that spoke to me, and it kind of said like, hey, like this might not be where you're going to end up, but it's the scenic route to where God wants you to be. And that like kind of just held on to me. And as I was moving into my new house, I found this piece of artwork again. I haven't seen it since 2017 when we both left. And it made me pause and really start thinking about VCF. Because this church plant, when we started on Super Bowl Sunday this year, was 4 years in the making. And people that were originally supposed to be here have never set foot in this room. And people that we never ever thought would be here are here this morning. And they've joined the family. And this ride has not always felt scenic. I mean, personally, I worked in retail at Burlington, not Coat Factory anymore, just Burlington, for 6 months, just waiting for the moment when David was like, Rhiannon, I can hire you. Retail's not fun, people. And I know that my story isn't nearly as tragic or as pain-filled as a lot of people in this room, because many of us left churches that meant the world to us. And some because we felt a direct call by God to come and help start VCF or continue the work of VCF. But others left because sometimes the situations we were in were no longer tenable and we could no longer stay. That is not a scenic route. It's a route filled with weeds and flat tires and no cell service, so you can't even get out of it. But what if it isn't? What if our scenic routes, that the beauty of them are in the eye of the beholder? Who here loves the beach? Raise your hand if you love the beach. Lewis thinks you're crazy because he thinks it's a bacteria-ridden cesspool.
One's not for everyone.
Right? So, for some of you, that's nirvana. For Lewis, that is hell. Who here really likes like a lovely like mountain scene with like a bunch of evergreens? To my friends in Kansas, we are all insane because that is a death trap waiting to happen. Don't you know you could drive off of that cliff at any time and die? This was said to me multiple times. People do not like the mountains. Or for me, personally, I love the desert. Like, to me, I look at the desert and I'm like, I am home. But sorry, Lewis, to pick on you, but you were the one who said it. He comes in and I was like, Lewis, how was the drive? And he was like, Brown? and more brown. And I was like, welcome to Nevada. It's great. My point is that what if we shifted our perspective? And instead of seeing the path of our lives, the path of this church specifically, as something that is unphotogenic, we see it as a place of joy, peace, and fulfillment. Because, guys, this life is all we get. And it is way too long for us to be miserable or constantly looking back and just thinking, if only. And as you think back on 2019, take a second look at the paths you've taken. Some, they are everything you could ever want and more. Others are flat, dry, and dusty. But guess what? They are still your path. And you have to remember, right? The Israelites did not like wandering in the desert for 40 years. This was not fun. But how do we know that they wandered in the desert for 40 years? If somebody didn't realize how important it was to write down the pain and the suffering and the hurt and the fear and the confusion. That was still their story, despite the fact that it sucked. So no matter what happened this year, that is still part of your story, even if it sucked. That doesn't mean you need to dwell there. In fact, it means the exact opposite. It's saying, this route might not be my most scenic journey to me, but it's still my journey. It's still my story. This is the story that we have. And I know that it's a beautiful story because I know that God is still working. And I know that because you're sitting in this room, you're listening to a sermon, and you're breathing. So therefore, God is still working. And even if you weren't breathing, God has raised people from the dead, so he is still working. So where do we go from here? We've acknowledged that sometimes our lives wander off the path that God wants us to, and God is so good and faithful to us. We've reminded ourselves that a route might not exactly be scenic to others, but it's what we got, and it's going to be good. What I love about the song Come Out of Mount is that it has a line that says, here I raise my Ebenezer. And Keith, correct me if my Hebrew is wrong, but I got this off the internet. But the word Ebenezer means stone of help. Eben, if I'm saying that right, means stone. Ezer means help. Keith can correct you. You can correct me later. But what I love about that is that it's God saying, what the writer is saying, here I raise the help that you're giving me. Because an Ebenezer comes from 1 Samuel, when the prophet Samuel says, wow, we totally just defeated the Philistines because of God's help. You guys were so unfaithful. Not even kind of. You have been chronically unfaithful. But God still provided. So here I raise my Ebenezer, my stone of help, to remind us that God still provided, even when we sucked. There's something that's so important about remembering what your Ebenezer is, what your pillar of stone is. Because that's how my brain works, is I hear a song lyric and then I'm like, how does that fit? So I kept hearing, here I raise my Ebenezer. And it reminded me of Joshua building the pillar of stone to say, when your children ask, tell them. We don't all have children in here, but we have friends and family. And we can point back and look and we can say, this is the moment. Here's my Ebenezer, the proof of God's love, the proof of God's help. And so while we don't have stone pillars, I'm not going to have somebody come rolling in stones. You guys thought I would for a second, didn't you? No. But what we do have are pictures. I think that's our modern version of an Ebenezer, right? Because think about it. You pull out the photo album, you pull out your phone, and you're like, look at my grandkid. And you swipe and you let people know about your grandkids. Yes, Mitch, I was side-eyeing you. Right? But I also never come to my house and say, Rhiannon, you have lovely photo albums. Be ready for a 3-hour conversation as I flip through them. Our photos have stories. They remind us of things. Those are our Ebenezers because we can point and look. One of my favorite things to do is to point out a picture of me at my senior prom. Because my mom, with my full blessing, went to women's retreat that year. But Mary, because she was pregnant with Micaiah, stayed behind. And she helped me get ready for prom because I'm not a girly girl and I needed help. But I had given my mom full blessing to go. I wanted her to have a great time. And what I love is that there's a picture of both of us because Mary loves purple and I'm in a purple prom dress and Mary's next to me in purple. And she's pregnant with Michaela and I love that picture because I love going, that's Michaela. That's the proof of God's love, right? Children are such a blessing. And I have stories of that all over the place of like, oh, I have that story and that story and that story where I remember things. So I wanted to look back on this year. So the picture on still your left. That's from our launch weekend. Do you remember when the TVs were way up here and really hard to see if you sat in the front? The second one is from outside of my parents' fifth wheel. That was the picture I took to say, nope, we are not having church today. There's too much snow. But God still provided because we had 80 on a snowy Super Bowl Sunday. And when we came back, after missing a week of church, our second week that we were supposed to have church, we missed it. We still had people showing up, over 60 people on the third. That is my Ebenezer. That is my pillar of stone. Or how about the time that we raised enough money to send all of the kids and teens that wanted to go to camp. And the things that changed in the students' lives. And also taught me that Shayna's never allowed to buy Charlotte a piece of clothing again. Everybody, that is all from Shayna. That is all of Charlotte's clothing. Oh, man. Or how about VBS? I loved it. We got the teens involved. We got the kids involved. I mean, poor Amanda and Vivian just had the teens crawling, or the kiddos crawling all over them. It was beautiful. Vivian loved it. Or how about Christmas Eve? I love this picture. We packed out the room, guys. We had over, what did we say, David? 205. We had 205 people between the two services. That's amazing. These are our touchstones for us to look back to and say, God showed up. Even though we may have strayed from the path this year personally, even though the road to VCF has not been easy, and my 2019 has been real rough. But I know that God is still here. And how I know that is because I see it in the faces of my friends and family. I see it in the community I'm rebuilding here. All of my friends moved away, so I had to come back and find new friends. That was hard. And I also see it in all of your faces. We are a community together. We can look at each other's faces and say, this is my pillar of stone, and I will remember this. I've known Jo for years, and I talk about her when I'm not here, because I've known her and I live life with her. And it's only through community that we get that, where we get stories that we can share, we can point to it, and we can say, I can't wait until I'm 70 and I can say, grandkids, did I ever tell you about Jo? And they're like, Grandma, please stop. Please stop. We know a lot about Jo. I never said you were. I just said until I was 70. I know you're not 70. But my point is that it doesn't matter how far you stray, God will still guide you. It doesn't matter how hard this year was or how hard next year is. I'm going to work on being positive. Next year is going to be great. Yes, we do. Kendra and David are going to make me positive, they swear. But it doesn't matter how hard this year was. We have the faithfulness of God right here in this room. You have it in your life. And it's going to be a good year, guys. If for no other reason, then we are exactly where God wanted us to be. And what's better than that?